Thank you all for joining us. And now I'll pass it on to Biniam to talk a little bit about Intibau and about the talk today.
Thank you, Mina. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. And I'm really happy that we're already on the third talk of our series. So the lecture is basically, it's focusing on the built traditions and heritage of Ethiopia. And we very much like to learn and initiate a discussion on local building practices in and around the country. And today's speakers would be Brook Tefera, who has been an architect. He graduated from the Addis Ababa University School of Architecture. I think it's quite a while back, back in the early 2000s. Since then, he has been practicing, and he has been also lecturing at the same university for quite a few years. And then he has been also the secretary of the Association of Ethiopian Architects on different occasions. And he is also currently a practicing architect in a firm, which he is a founding member of the firm. It's called Bigar Builders and Developers. It's a multidisciplinary Ethiopian firm engaged in design, engineering, and project management. And one of their special areas of interest is restoration and renovation of the country's built heritage. And today he will be speaking about a couple of projects that they undertook within their practice. One is in the capital Atleast, and the other is in the eastern part of the country, in the city of Harar. I'll pass it to Brook shortly, but in the meantime, if you have any questions while he's speaking, you can type it in the chat, and we will also open the floor later after he finishes for discussion. So please make sure that you do come forward with questions and your reflections. Before finally passing it over, I would also like to remind you that you can subscribe to the mailing list, and you can also become a member of the Intibau Ethiopia network and the bigger Intibau, the international network. Mina will be sharing the link on how to do so shortly on the chat. And yeah, thank you. Welcome everyone, and over to you, Brook.
Okay, thank you, Intibau, and thank you for having me for this third session of what is proving to be an exciting session on built heritage, built architectural heritage, and learning from cultures of different countries. I am honored to be part of the panel and to share the experiences of my firm, especially with regard to two projects that we did in two different parts of Ethiopia. So thank you again, Biniam, Juliet, and Mina for organizing such a wonderful session. And I think we should keep up culture going forward. So when I come to my session, I will just briefly say a few words about Bigar. Bigar is a young firm. It was formed in 2012, and by 4 partners. It's about 9 years now since we have been practicing architecture, design, engineering, project management, or all those aspects of the built environment, practiced mostly in Ethiopia, in different parts of the country. Apart from most of the projects we do, of special interest for us is to get involved in historical heritage renovation and restoration projects. And we had the chance to work on 2 interesting projects that were completed. And today's session would be will give me the opportunity to share what those buildings were, what the journey was like, and I'm sure we'll have an interesting discussion session. So I think let me just go through the first project. It's a restoration project of a 100-year-old building, which is built right in the center of Addis Ababa, around the neighborhood called Bole. It's located in Kirkos sub-city, but the area is called Bole. And just behind the Cameroon Embassy on Bole Road is where this building is located. Now, this project, it used to be the house of a former nobleman called Jazmach Ayaleo Birru. And this used to be his residence during the time of Emperor Menelik. And this project had been nationalized after the 1974 revolution in Ethiopia. And ever since that time, for a period of about 37, 36 years, this project, this house that you see now, this is the restored condition, had been abandoned, had an area where close to 22 families used to live. It was nationalized by the government, and it used to be owned by the Belay, which was the administrative area of that region. Or area. So about 22 families used to live in this house. When we started the project, the Addis Ababa administration during that time was generous enough to give a caretaker status to Lia Kabede, an Ethiopian supermodel. She's quite renowned. And she and her husband overtook this property, which is still under register, which is a registered heritage, and the ownership is still with the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. But they took the caretaker status, and that speeded the renovation project. So, like I said, the location is around Bole. You see this first picture, which was one of the first that we started upon. Before we embarked as an office on this project, there was the clients had gone their own process of acquiring the services of a contract, and through their tendering or through their selection process, they had selected Varnero, which is one of the leading construction firms in Ethiopia. So after they signed a construction agreement with the contractor was when our firm was invited to come on board as lead supervisor and project manager as well for the project. So this picture that you see is the moment when we started erecting scaffolding to carefully start the renovation work. This house, like I said, is about 100 years old, and it has been abandoned. It has been in a very dilapidated condition, and the whole idea of this project was to restore it to its former, age. That required a lot of structural intervention, because as you can see, most of the elements, except the main ground floor, which was built from masonry, was intact, but the rest of the building on the upper floors and all around it, including the roof and the balconies, the bridge, and everything had to be carefully dismantled and reconstructed. So the project had this program, and while maintaining its external image, it was also a project where the internal part had to be completely changed to cater for a new service. The developers wanted to use this as a guest house. Mind you, as caretakers, they are not allowed to use this as their own residence, because this is in a way a property of the city or the government, heritage. So they had to convert it into something that gave service to general public. The idea was to convert it into a guest house. So with this understanding, we went into the project. The project team also included different members. We as the BIGAR were the project managers, the main team overseeing the entire activity. In architecture, in terms of architectural design, Architects was a firm which was on board, which developed certain preliminary design on how to convert the house into a guest house. Interior designer was, the services were procured by the clients themselves. A firm called Gussen and Gossen, which is from Switzerland, was on board. Structural MEP was definitely and fully our jurisdiction. It was all designed by BIGAR, and the contractor was, as I said earlier, was Varnero. So this project started 2012, the construction of it, and I'm going you through, some of the processes, what we went through, what we actually did. So some of the earliest images that you see, how the windows looked like, some of the areas, the balconies were really in a bad condition. So when we started dismantling them, majority of the building structure is built from wood, but very strong wood. They used the traditional ted, that's in Amharic. It's a version of pine wood, very strong, and that's why it stood the test of time. But when we started dismantling, the columns around verandas, the walkways and other elements, you can carefully see the test of time had its bearing on this structure. It was really in a bad condition. On the ground floor, the building had a collection of different finished materials, some in cement plaster, some in mortar, some in different colors and so on. So to restore it to the original condition, a careful dismantling, peeling away of all these unnecessary elements was the first point of exercise. And of course, we had to be very careful not to structurally damage the building, and a full structural assessment was done before our intervention. And for that, our structural design team did a careful analysis. We were guiding the process slowly so that the intervention of the contractor was carefully dictated. So, going into the first steps, these were images, earliest images of how we started the dismantling process. Look at the interior picture on the right, and you can see how we have peeled off, all the wall string and everything to see, some of the wood had been dilapidated, some of the spaces had been severely damaged, and it required full dismantling. Like the doors and the windows, we had to label them carefully. We had to label each and every item so that the most damaged elements of the building had to be reproduced in a wooden workshop. We were fortunate enough to use the extensive experiences of Varnero, their wood workshop, and their craftspeople, which really helped us along the way. So first order of business, we started working, both on the interior and on the exterior as well. But the strategy we adopted was we were going from the top down. So that means careful dismantling of the roof, amendment of the truss, careful replacement of these elements with equivalent material, and going down all the way to the bottom. So that's what you can see. We took down the roof on the top, and we had to replace, after cleaning, polishing, and preserving the structural truss elements, which were very strong enough. So we had to redo the roof. We kept as much of the original elements as possible. If these elements were structurally damaged or in a severe condition, we had to change them with equivalent wooden material, equivalent ted or equivalent stronger wooden materials, all properly polished and prepared as to the requirements of the structural engineers. On the interior side as well, we tried to preserve as many of the elements that were in good condition. So peculiarities of this project are, I mean, if you go the previous, the upper floors are all built in, in a wooden structure, which were enveloped by mud plastering. The entire plastering of the wall was in mud, and of course a lime mortar applied as an exterior finish. When you go to the lower levels, it's all stone masonry, well-built stone masonry, and the entire plastering was done in lime mortar. And an interesting aspect of this project is it had a basement floor, all intact, but a little bit damaged, and with water encroaching, there was a lot of dumps around it. So part of the engineering intervention we did was we carefully dug around the foundations of the building all around the perimeter and introduced a French drain or water drainage, so that the water can actually be diverted before it actually encroached on the peripheries of the building. Simultaneously, we had to carefully do roofing, sealing exercise of all the stone joints through cement, mortar, and waterproofing, cementitious waterproofing chemical. It was all technically done in a very careful manner. Since some floors were damaged severely, we had to introduce structural section beams that can withstand, the floor load, and anticipating also the future function of this building as a guest house for quite a collection of people on the building. We also were finishing up the roof structure. Originally, most of the roof truss was covered by a ceiling, but we had to expose as much of it as possible so that it adds to the architectural delight. What you see on the right-hand side picture is after doing the corrugated sheet roofing, we had to do a bit of insulation on the top. Doing the roofing, we had to do the insulation so that from weathering, from sound, and from other aspects, building is a bit comfortable. All of this will be covered with plaster boards. So going into 2014, you can see that certain elements of the exterior, the wooden columns and others were carefully being replaced. Preparing them in the workshop, tested very well and graded what we required. So we had to produce all of this and bring them to site and carefully start installing them on the lower levels, and simultaneously proceeding with the floor, the veranda on the upper floor, and then of course the columns simultaneously following up on this. On the interior part, we had careful introduction of wooden beams introduced at careful areas needed structural strengthening, because this intervention also required the strengthening of structural elements. Whatever was damaged had to be replaced, re-strengthened, and also catered for the services of the new function. But the interior side, you can see most of the walls all in mud plaster, and of course lime conveniently applied after that. Proceeding to the interior spaces, the corridors, the verandas came next with the floorboard, balconies all done, and the columns also erected. On the interior spaces, the windows were a bit tricky because, when you work with a building built from mud, irregularity is an aspect we wanted to preserve. We didn't want to fashion it too much towards regularity, but to not affect the production of windows, we had to introduce wooden counter frames all around windows, label them carefully so that the windows were properly produced, and when they came to site, they fit exactly where we wanted them to do. So this was a very careful exercise that we did with the contractor. Just one more thing on the previous slide, you can see in certain section of the building that where the roof truss was severely damaged, we had to literally dismantle, re-erect, and build it again so that it also connects with the structural integrity. So our structural engineer really helped in that regard, giving good direction and guidance all through the steps. This project was not only, this project was not done just in the office, it was mostly done on site. You know, a lot of workshop drawings, detailed drawings, situation analysis and so on went hand in hand with the contractor's team. So on the inside, again, you know, certain areas where the structural wooden elements were introduced, some were strengthened. You know, the ceiling was pushed all the way to the all along, following the profile of the roof, so that, you know, you get enough headroom, as well as, you know, the play of this structural elements also adds to the architectural delight. An interesting aspect of one area, what we did was when we peeled off the layer to replaster it, to redo it, we were intrigued by the interesting shape of, you know, some of the structural elements that were behind the mud wall. So we exposed a section of it, and we preserved, you know, the mud from falling, but we preserved it in such a manner that we kind of exposed the layer of the building, showing what was there, and we left it there as a piece of mural art. In most areas, since this is a guest house, as you can see in the middle picture, we used boards with steel frames. You know, wherever we introduced, you know, water supply lines, drainage lines, you know, areas that required, you know, future maintenance, replace, or any unforeseen circumstances, we used plaster boards, because you introduce this in a mud wall or in a stone wall, and then come back to chisel and damage, you know, the very nature of building. So this introduction of new services, we played around with modern materials like plaster boards, conveniently helping us, you know, for future maintenance. So go further, you know, here you can see the middle bridge, which was dismantled at the beginning, had been re-erected. A very interesting thing is, if you look at the image on the left side, we had to take down this element, you know, that's in the middle of the picture. It's like a veranda, a space that you can, it used a room, but we converted it into a veranda, a sitting space. And we had taken down each stone step by step. We labeled it, we polished, cleaned it, and we rebuilt it again exactly like it was. But we had to take it down and had to, you know, properly anchor it with the ground and rebuild it from ground up, so that there was a bit of a challenge structurally, originally, because of, you know, certain defects that we found foundation. So this was all amended and rebuilt from the ground up exactly the way it was the beginning. On the upper parts, the wooden columns continued, and the corrugated, of course, is covering up the top parts. So more, this is one of our favorite spaces in this house. If you looked at the original images, this was all covered in corrugated sheet. It was an abandoned space, but most of these things that were built during the 1900s, they had this typical, in some of them you have this typical clerestory lights, you know, light comes in through the top section. They played very well with color glass windows. So we also created a system where we brought in this gallery of light into the interior, and all of this goes right on the corridor and leading into the sitting room of the first floor. So the brilliant play of light, especially in the afternoon, is a delight to look at. All of the truss that you see was original. It was 100 years ago. We just took away the corrugated sheet, replaced it, we polished all of the wood. Look, wood, some of it is a bit irregular, right? It looks a bit organic. This was the original truss. We just preserved it, we polished it, we varnished it, and we used like oil for marine wood and so on, so to strengthen it and keep its color. But when you look at it, it's pretty much what was there, but this time it is exposed to add architectural delight. Of course, going into 2015, the building slowly starts taking shape. Imagine 2012 to 2015, 3 years, careful exercise. Everything had to be done carefully, dismantled, re-erected, and you know, put to resemble its original condition. If you look at the image on the left-hand side, the villa with the gallery of, that glass that you see, it was not in that condition. It was completely destroyed when we started on our original restoration. But then, we had to redo it in a similar manner, but much better quality of wood, quality of construction, so that it can withstand another 100 years. A staircase that you can see also in the same image, the staircase that was there was completely destroyed, partly replaced by a steel stair and so on, but we had to redo it all in wood, all resembling original structure, but in a much better strengthened version. Then we started coming out into the landscape, building the stone steps, introducing greenery around the green area, the green space that you see, that small plant that you see in the image, it was there from the beginning, so we had to work with it, build flower boxes, sometimes playing with the landscape with what you have, also complementing the wooden elements and the rather the rather simple earthy tone that this building was emanating when you look at it. Interior space on the right hand side, if you look at that door, this door leads to the living room. And that door was there for 100 years. So polished it, we cleaned it, and we fashioned it to accommodate, with proper hinges and proper doorknobs. We had to adapt it to the new function that was required. So, working in the landscape, the building on the interior, most was finished, most of the doors, the windows were fit, and the building was coming up, it was taking shape. The downs were in place, they were also all put in corrugated sheet, but we also tried to play a little bit with, this building is a very controlled element from a design point of view, because you only with certain elements, but we created a landscape that can complement it. The whole area where this building rests is about it's over 2,400 square meters. So that, it's just about in the middle of this property. So it allowed us to play with a lot of landscaping around it. Interior spaces taking shape, the doors, all fitting, the glass and everything allowed a little bit of transparency. That's telling you about which we were going to fashion into a sitting corner for coffee ceremony and others was taking shape. While on the side, if you have noticed, we have put insulation on the roofing structure, for heat, for sound and so on. But we come on the corridors, we just painted the corrugated sheet in white color. The contrast with the dark brown of the wood was just excellent. The wood is always amplified coming out, and it was the main element of the architecture. So go out again, the wood and the craftsmanship was really a beauty, a delight in this building. The perfection, the execution, all of what you see there, we produced all the detailings, all the specifications, right down to the type of member to be used. And we really, really are grateful to the team of Varnero, without whom this project would never have been achieved. Building taking shape, most of the wooden elements again from the outside varnished. By the way, it was a continuous journey of rectification as well, because some of the columns we delivered had a little bit of warp in them, these were seasoned wood. They had to be prepared in the work. They had to be dried and then delivered to site. And over the course of this 3-4 year journey, we had the winter season, we had the summer season. Some of them changed character. They had to be carefully dismantled again, and they have to be reintroduced. So it was also like a very interesting journey. This was like a live project. It was not something you just were done, closed. No, you had to work, you had to check, working with elements which, at least from our experience, we had to learn a lot from site, from the nature of the materials. And it was an interesting experience. Building taking shape, we were coming out into the landscape. designing the footpath, the green areas, the type of vegetation. By the way, one thing which I failed to mention, landscape architecture was also handled by Bigar. We have a landscape architect who works with us, so we worked with her in the selection of the species of plants and the type of the garden. Of course, and the owners were very much involved all throughout this process, because had they not been patron of the arts that they were, we could never have achieved this. They were very much involved, very careful about the selection of material, the ambience they required from the building. And of course, we had also visits from the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, who made sure that the restoration, the exterior look of the building had to be preserved to its intended target. So, most of the wood elements in the lime plaster taking shape. Now, it was paving way for the fitting of the interior doors, some of the interior elements, the lighting and others. The interior lighting, furniture and everything were carefully selected by the interior designer with a continuous dialogue with our team. And it's also an interesting journey. Some of the finishing, so, after doing the landscape, we started to, complement this with certain green, because you have the wood, you had to, bring a bit of, how do you call, we have to give it a bit of life. We have to give it a bit of elements to contrast. So you can see the wooden, the stone way, and then a bit of green, and then the wooden columns complement. It was, very organic, very, how do you call it? It's something that you can easily relate to. This is the family room on the first floor. So if you look, this is after it's furnished, the lighting elements introduced. So look at the wooden truss, all exposed. Most of it is original. Some had to be reinforced, re-strengthened and placed back. But when you expose the truss, it's such architectural delight. The wood is the very element that we wanted to concentrate on, the dark brown, and all the color of the curtains and the cushions and others had to complement and create a character along the way. The dining room, it has an open, this is like a void space, an open up or on down, depending on how you understand it. But, most of the furniture and everything had to be carefully selected. The color and the combination, we carefully studied each and every element. The cutlery, some of the elements to be used for the guest house were also selected and brought to site. So, we had to furnish, look, and it was also very interesting, because we ended up also furnishing as a team, how to put the tables, how to orient them and so on. And ended up, hands-on, on site. We rolled up our sleeves, we were site, working all as a team, and this is what you get for, that's the living room. You have noticed that, different colors for the family room, for the dining room, the color teams were carefully selected so that characters had, each room had its own, different character. And then look at the ceiling of this living room. It's all, those steel eye sections were all original. They were here with the building all throughout. So we cleaned them, we painted them to complement with the wooden floor and the wooden ceiling, but we preserved elements of the building that were there for since its original construction. The bedroom, there you can see, the truss exposed again, part of the architectural element. And on the further end, you can see that those short walls that you see of this were built in plasterboard. So they were the bathrooms, the shower spaces, and so on. And a careful mention here, if you carefully look at this element, it's a bathtub. It's a Victorian cast iron bathtub, which was like 150 kilograms. So when they transported that to site, they completely surprised our clients, and we said, are you kidding us? Are we going to put that on the floor? But then, of course, we had to create a structural system and we carefully hid it in the floor. We hid it in the floor so that, you know, what you see is actually just a bathtub without any structural support. But this was one of the improvisations we did on site. It was not only a preparation of a drawing documents, it was also an exercise into improvising and working on site and commenting the building in the best manner possible. So after a 4.5-year journey, we completed a successful project. You can see how we carefully chose, you know, the landscape, the paved surface, the green, careful selection of the green areas, and the expansive garden spaces was quite a delight for the developers to use. We completed it in about 4.5, I would say comfortably like 5 years. It was quite a journey, beautiful building, a beautiful project. And one thing I have to mention is this was a very good teamwork, and we did a very good understanding between team members, interior designer, clients themselves, and the contractor, of course, who did an exceptional job once again. And we really capitalized on all of everybody's knowledge to finish the building in the anticipated idea, with the anticipated idea. So that brings me to close for my first presentation, but I am welcome to take questions if there are any, or I can run through the second part presentation. So how should we do it?
Yeah, I think we have a couple of questions in regards to this presentation, so maybe you can answer those and then proceed to the next one. It would also be kind of like a break for you because you've been talking for a while.
No, that's a good idea.
All right, so the first question is from Juliet. She asks, which type of ventilation did you prioritize, natural ventilation or mechanical ventilation?
Okay. We used natural ventilation mostly, and because most of the building, most of the living rooms, the bedrooms and everything all have access to windows. So we used natural ventilation, but there were certain areas where we had bathrooms and we used not a mechanical ventilation, but an extraction system. So we used a system where we integrated the operation of the lighting switch with the mechanical duct. So when somebody switched on the lights, the mechanical extraction helps to extract the necessary odor from the room. So we carefully concealed it in the drop ceilings, and even when it comes laterally out through the walls, you don't see it. But we used a couple of bathrooms, and it's you know, it's something that can operate on the electric load of the. It was a very let's say it was not energy consumed. It was not a mechanical ventilation, but rather a toilet extraction.
Interesting. The next question is from Blaine. She asks, wondering which kind of inspections or diagnosis methods were carried out before the intervention plan as non-destructive test on the structure.
So regarding the structural element, we had to, for instance, on the lower levels, it was all built in masonry, so the careful peeling away of the cement plastering all around it revealed the masonry structure that was all around the building. And then a similar careful peeling of the surface revealed the structural element all around the basement floors. And then we carefully, we created a careful setback away from the foundations of the building and carefully at strategic locations to understand the foundation makeup of the entire building. So this kind of, you know, careful interventions were all done all around the building. And before we intervened, we kind of took our time understanding, taking away layers by layer. And before we made interventions, we had structural analysis made, structural intervention designs prepared for the contractor to intervene. But none of the elements that we did destructive, they were more like, you know, careful removal of layers and understanding what the property of the building before suggesting an intervention. So like there was a lot of improvisation, but careful interventions, not a destructive model. Structural engineers were well versed in that.
Yeah, so Blaine, I hope that answered your question. If not, please let me know. The next question is from Fikra Selassie. He asks, steel, cement, soundproofing were introduced. How do you relate this material with the authenticity in material? Meaning, I think he meant in introducing these elements in such a traditional building.
Indeed, but one thing I mentioned at the beginning, I understand that that's a question definitely coming from an architect, but what I mentioned at the beginning of the project, at the beginning presentation rather, was we wanted to create a guest house that has to cater to the requirements of a modern client or a modern client base, which will be extensive. So, these buildings, had they been a private property catering to the need of a private client, would have, avoided, all of these elements. Some clients can say part of the natural character is to also listen to the sound of the rain drops on the corrugated sheet. I completely understand that sentiment, but we are building a guest house which will cater to an extensive client base. You have to also look into elements of comfort. This is very important also in architecture. So insulation had to be introduced to also, mitigate the impact of weather, because corrugated iron sheet is not such a good element when it comes to thermal insulation. And at the same time, some clients may be sensitive to the raindrops on corrugated sheets, and we have to insulate and protect and cater for maximum comfort. Steel sections, when this building caters for an audience that is going to use it different type of purposes, structural strengthening have to be introduced. You cannot do this with traditional materials like stone or wood, which can do the work, but not in an efficient manner as modern materials like steel. Like I mentioned, 150 kilogram bathtub surprisingly landed in Addis, and to put that on top, on the first floor, on a wooden floor, it would never have withstood the load, only its load, but when you put in water in, a person inside it, imagine the amount of weight that you are imposing on the wood floor. So we have to create a structural system of steel, that a web of steel network in a suspended floor that distributed the load all throughout without affecting the wooden floor. So, this is engineering, this is all manipulation of material. And in a way, as architects, we have to use our techniques, our tricks, whether it is modern or natural, but not necessarily reserving ourselves as traditionalists.
I hope that answered your question, Fikra Selassie. He also has another one. Let's finish that one before we move on to the next. He asks, hiding some interventions might be good for aesthetics, but shouldn't it be made visible for future viewers or conservators to see what has been done?
No, that's a very good point. In fact, this building, had it been a museum or a library or a cafeteria catering to a wider client base, it would definitely have achieved much better, and the exposure would have been much bigger. A very valid point. But we work on a project like this. You also have to look at your clients. The clients had, they want to preserve the house, but they also wanted to make, they also had to get returns for the massive investment that they made on the building. One thing I can frankly tell you is renovation or a restoration project of a thing such as the one we did is substantial. Number one, there is limited experience in Ethiopia. So when you bring in the expertise and construction firms like Varnero is an expert and probably one of the best in Addis. So their overhead and their cost is also very high. Working with wood is very expensive because you don't find that expertise in structural wood, installing structural wood in Ethiopia. So all of these elements added substantial financial pressure on the side of the clients, and clients wanted to create a business model whereby they can also recuperate the mass funds that they had invested on the building. They've done it in another way, but our clients chose to use this as a guest house for a certain client base. As an architect, we appreciated the opportunity to work on this project, but we never really went into dictating how outcome should be. But that's a valid point, perhaps for future projects.
Okay. Next, we have Piet asking, were the rain gutters part of the original design, or were they introduced during restoration?
There were rain gutters that resembled a little bit like what we had, but most of them were abandoned when we started the intervention. So some of the gutters had peeled away, some of the gutters were sticking out, but there were no downpipes. We could actually make out the look of the downpipes, but there were downpipes when we started the project. We started consulting earlier pictures of this house, but unfortunately we could not find the one with the proper gutters. So we fashioned it in such a manner that they can align along the columns of the building and they can taper down. So the circular corrugated profile was preferred. Corrugated roofing sheet as well as the corrugated gutters were part of the original design. So we used the corrugated circular downs to kind of, they looked thinner in profile and they could align easily with the numerous columns we had around the veranda. So that's when we made the choice.
Okay, perfect. Brook, we have 3 more questions. Would you like for them to wait after the next presentation, or are you okay with continuing this question and answer session?
No, please.
Okay.
No, I can take questions. Yep.
Okay. So next question is from Tarn. He asks, does the Jazmach Ayalo Buru project accessible to the public or only to the paying guests? And also, do you know who the original builders were? Either are they from Ethiopia or elsewhere? And also, Tarn is the next speaker of our series. In case you didn't know, Brook, yeah, he's coming right next to you in May. So that's his question. And he asks, the building has similarities to the houses between Piazza and Arat Kilo and 5 Kilo, said to be built by Armenian settlers. So is this similar to that?
I will start with the second and third question. Yes, there were influences, the Armenians, the Indians, and the Arabs. And this is part of the collection of buildings that were built in the 1900s, which were conveniently called the Addis Ababa style. Most of it, like I said, found around Piazza, some around Mercato, and this one is located around Boli. There were like 4 around Boli too. So they were houses of the nobility, and the Armenian, Indian, and Arabic building culture sort of influenced and was actually also built by some of the craftsmen from this era. So that's a very good observation. And yes, this building all falls in that category. The first question regarding accessibility is in line with what I think Fikra Selassie also quite earlier asked. Unfortunately, the building is open currently, at least currently. It's open only for the certain guests who want to use its facilities, but the clients are working. They have a facility manager on board now since about a year ago, and they are working out, creating certain events or possibilities of engaging public through different events. You have seen that we had extensive garden spaces. A recent conversation we had with the clients was they wanted to kind of create a possibility of engaging the public, but to what extent and to what level that we open, I'm not so sure. But part of what you commented in earlier class A2, I completely share your points of view. Unfortunately, the nature of the building makes it a little bit private and accessible to only a certain section of people.
Taryn, I hope that answered your question. If not, let me know. Next question, we have one from Gurma. He says, I am really impressed with the entire presentation. However, my question is, why did you not choose traditional furnitures?
That was an area, like I said, this project was a team project. We were architects and engineers working all around, but the interior designer is a very close friend of the clients. The clients Kabada in Kasahun Kabada lived a bigger portion of their lives in New York, in Paris, in Rome, and they are Ethiopian by birth, by nationality. They are international citizens, so to speak. So the influences, the culture and the ambience they required, and Estelle herself being a Swiss citizen, they wanted these elements of, European architecture or ambience to be part of the design. So that was the part of the change also, to create the balance between the two, because the clients very much dictated for the ambience to lean toward that direction. And, we were the Ethiopian contingent trying to introduce as much of the local element and local input possible. But a lot of it had to, was influenced by the client's requirements, the client's brief before we started the project, and the interior designer herself. So that's why it was a good right of observing, but it was also part of the brief by the clients.
Okay. Lastly, before we head on to the next presentation, we have a comment from Fikra Selassie. He says, well, it looks like a good building for inauguration, but I think it has a potential to teach a lot of people about heritage conservation. So that's a comment from Fikra Selassie.
Yeah.
If you have something to add to that.
No, thank you very much. Yes, honestly, it really can contribute to the preservation of built heritage in Addis Ababa and in Ethiopia. We have a lot to do on ourselves to bring this to the attention of the general public. So yes, it adds to that, and we were honestly honestly lucky enough to have clients who believed in the preservation process. And I can say both Leah and Kasahun, they are like, patrons of the art. They are fascinated with art, architecture, history. So it's really rare that you can find a client who can believe in that vision. And also, clients are looking for projects that have return, right? Who has the patience to work on a restoration project for 5 years? 5 years.
So,
So honestly, it was, I really also want to thank the clients who had the patience. Clients are really impatient in Ethiopia. I don't know about the rest of the world. Very impatient here, but these clients, they wanted to work on the journey on, importing all of those materials, taking the time until we investigated the structural integrity of the building and so on. Unless you believe in it, you can really not be part of it. So yes, it really adds to the vocabulary of restoration projects in Ethiopia. And we would also like to share a lot of this experience with a lot of professionals and the public.
This sounds
And
good.
one,
That's it.
just one more concluding remark. We could have done this without Varnero, because one thing which we really capitalized upon is Varnero has had this extensive experience working on the Grand Palace, which is the present Unity Park. Most of the former residents of Emperor Minilik, including the big hall where the Prime Minister hosted his funding dinner and so on, they were all preserved by Varnero. So Varnero worked with an Italian team that were expert in wood preservation, in working with mud, with stone, and so on. That knowledge was preserved, and that expertise was what we capitalized on when we did the Jazma Chayali restoration. So a big appreciation, just on par with the clients, to Varnero, without whom we could not have achieved this project.
Sounds good. That's it for the questions for now. I think we can head into the next presentation. If you can start sharing your screen for that.
Okay, so the next one, I'm going to take you on a journey to the east of Ethiopia, or to the east of Addis Ababa. Harar is a city it is one of the oldest cities in Ethiopia, reputed to be over 1,000 years old. The beautiful city center of Jagol is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And our next project, which I'm going to present, is located right in the heart of Jagol, with the compound of the Arthur Rambo Museum. Arthur Rambo was a famous French poet, protege, artist, adventurer, and soldier of fortune, some try to call him, but such a remarkable individual. He lived in Harar for a brief period before he sadly passed away at a young age. He left a lot of memories, and some of those memories are preserved in Harar, a museum called the Arthur Rambo Museum, where his poetry, his works, his paintings, and some books are preserved for everyone to visit. This project, it started originally in 2013. There was Harar, the city of Harar, and the city of Charleville-Mézières in France have a sister cooperation, they were sister cities cooperating, and very much also connected through the history of Arthur Rambo. And because of special relationship, there was a delegation from the city of Charleville-Mézières who visited, and because we worked on the restoration project, the Jazma Chayali project, they said, will you be interested to work on a project where they wanted to convert a building in the Arthur Rambo Museum into a guest house? And we said yes. And it was a wonderful opportunity. So we joined a team that started seeing, the area around the museum and so on. But sadly, this project in 2014, just about a year later, couldn't continue. We finished most study, but before we started on the implementation phase, the delegation was part of the municipality of Charleville-Mézières, and because of the elections, they had to abandon their posts, so the project was suspended for some period. And in 2017, the embassy of France contacted us again, and they said they wanted to start off the project where it went, and that we said, okay, we are interested as architects to come on. And we assembled a team of interesting professionals together to start the city once again after being commissioned by French embassy. So, we looked at Harar. The history of Harar in itself is unique, and the relationship with France, and the early 18th century and 19th century was a fascinating journey. So we started collecting certain us about the crafts, the culture, and the unique connection between the two. And Harar by itself is such a melting pot of cultures. It's such a beautiful city. You walk in the Jagol, and I tell you, you guys, you will be transported back in time. Harar has just a lot of people say I Dawa to the east, but I tell you, and I must confess, Harar has something special. You are transported back in time to an age of timelessness. There's just something about Harar that makes it beautiful. So its foundation, it being a center of civilization, the Islamic culture, Islamic calligraphy, the fact that they have such an intimate social network really makes the city quite unique. And for our project, we paid special attention to the handicrafts, to the calligraphy, to the embroidery, and other aspects, which really, the basketry is very unique in Harar. We wanted all of these elements to influence and be part of the background for the project we are anticipating. What you see on this picture is the Rambo House, or the main building of the Arthur Rambo Museum in Jagol. And this building was, the journey started back 1970s, early 1972, when the then French President Pompidou and our Emperor Haile Selassie had a special, Emperor Selassie was he also lived briefly as a young man in the city of Harar, where he's also on all that influence of culture also is part of his legacy. And then they started this conversation about creating a place as a remembrance for Artaud in the special place he has in Harar and also in France. So part of it was the creation of this museum, story building. At the lower levels, you have the library with quite an astonishing collection of books on Arthur Rambo, while on the upper part you have magnificent gallery where you see a collection of his sketches, pictures, and poetry. It's just nominal poetry. There's one poetry which I would like to recommend everyone on this occasion. It's French. It's called Le Bateau Ivre. I will simply type it on the chat section later. I mean, you really have to read that poem to see the magnitude and the capacity behind Arthur Rambo. So the other thing, apart from the special relationship that Rambo had, was a closer study of the architecture of the Harari house. The Harari house is unique in terms of its space organization and the clever arrangement of spaces. In a very small space, the Harari tradition allows you to put these elements where you can use different niches, different corners, different enclaves as areas where you can store different elements of the household. That those elements create a unique architecture, which is really interesting, and the spatial arrangement was one thing we took as an inspiration and we did closely. So this is the house. You have seen that when you enter into a courtyard, and this is what you see on your front. And when you turn to the right, this is what you see. The image on the left-hand side, you see the door on the lower end, and you come through that door. And in the courtyard is when you see the Arthur Rambo Museum, and on your right, you see this house, which is you access through a single stair. It is suspended above the Jagol wall, and it is used as a storage, and it's a space that can be used occasionally, but it's a very small space of like 35 square meters. So the idea was on a limited budget to see how we convert this into a guest house. So, we started studying again, a fully furnished Harari house, the sitting position, the artifacts, the color, the elements, and, this ambience it's really unique, and it really gives an interesting dimension to residential building. And the artifacts and the ornaments around the doors, around the different areas of the building, something which we wanted to take as inspiration for our restoration projects. Elements in the arts, the battery, the weaving, and there is so much intricacy in what the Harari people do, and there is so much art, there's so much of this craft that we can learn from. Some of the elements used in our daily lives are also used as ornaments on the walls. A very peculiar way of doing their ceiling by virtue of wooden logs as the bottom element. The top part is a collection of stone rubble mixed together to create a dense element over which it can be overlaid. Was very interesting to and inspect. At the same time, the bookshelves and the niches where sometimes they keep the holy Quran within it. Some of the elements are also kept in a very interesting way. So we took note of this and inspired design process a lot. So most of it, the crafts, the color, the elements were very interesting and very inspiring as well. You see the rich Harari house. So very, how can we replicate this ambience in a guest house, but how to cater for the requirements of the modern needs of occupants? That was the challenge, and with that we assembled an interesting team that had a project manager, architects, interior designer, structural and MEP, an artist, crafts and product design, of course, the contractor. So project management was handled by Bigar. The architectural design was also handled by our firm. For interior design, we worked with the renowned Jacques Dubois. Jacques Dubois is such an inspiring person, architect, interior design, craftsman in his own right, who had been involved in some of the most unique designs in Ethiopia, projects that range from the Roha Hotel in Lalibela, the Goha Hotel in Gondar, and so on. So that gentleman really, including the Sheraton Addis as well, we worked on different aspects of interior design. So this gentleman, we had the liberty of having a very good working relationship, and then we brought him as part of the design team to work with us. Artist, we worked on this project with Addis Kidanam. She's a very interesting artist and sculptor, craftsperson, very interesting individual. This lady, some of her works are that can be found in the lobby of the Hyatt Regency, in one of the new hotels in Addis Ababa, the sculpture and everything. So such a phenomenal artist, because when you work on a project like this of inspiration and transforming an existing building into something, you need not only architects and engineers, artists, craftspeople, and interior designers. So we have to assemble our team carefully. And of course, the selection of the contractor, after we did all the design and everything, when you work with a government institution, this project is also owned by the Harari Ministry of Culture and Tourism. But we advised them that if we go down the normal tender process, it would have been difficult because, through a tender process, it's just paperwork of technical capabilities, and then somebody can give you a competitive financial offer, and you can easily select that company to work on a project. But a restoration project, you cannot do it until you have your heart in it. So as part of the selection process, we said, let's do a pre-qualification tender. After that, we interview all the pre-qualified contractors, or we selected the right person for the project. So we had to do our arm twisting, and we had to be at our convinced best to bring the clients in line with what they wanted. So we selected a contractor who, interestingly, happened to be an architect. And so, you know, he was also such in love with Harar. He lived more his life there. And in our years at the university, he used to be 4 years my senior. So it was an interesting opportunity to work with this gentleman. Okay, we started situation analysis. We looked at the building, present condition, physical condition. You know, the ceiling is all low. The building had all these different elements gathered into it. It was a cement screed floor, and it was really, you know, a collect different elements which never really rhymed together, except that you have a lot of wood all around the building. So we studied, you know, the species of the wood, which mostly they used the Wanza wood, which is a local wood, a local type of wood, which was also readily available in Harar. So checked, you know, availability, because if you are working on a project in Harar and if you are planning to transport the product from Addis Ababa or other places, it would be quite expensive. And like I said, this is a project which had a tight budget, and whatever solutions and selections you made had to be carefully done. So, you know, it had a bathroom which was in a very bad condition, very dim light, hardly light coming in unless you open the door. But we had to remodel the entire spatial configuration. So the thing is, we knew we were getting rid of everything on the inside to reconfigure it to what we read. But we were very careful to assess structural part of the building, you know, the wall elements, the floor, the integrity of every member, and the nature of the truss, the type of, you know, the quality and type of the roofing cover and so on were carefully analyzed. And voila, this was the inspiration to the journey. So we said, this is how this guest house has to look like. So inspirational, you know, design sketch prepared by Jacques Dubois. No matter which kind of rendering software you use, architects are in this audience and they are listening to me. Listen, guys, no matter what you do, if you really abandon the hand sketch, you can never get this originality. Such vigor, such life, such inspiration can never be replicated with the computer software. So when Jacques made this sketch, you know, after several discussions, when he made it, and we just said, wow. And this is what we have to achieve. What does it take to achieve it? Physical assessment, spatial ergonomics, techniques, different elements, functionality, safety, other standards have to be met. So, you know, elements of architecture and engineering started encroaching into shaping, but all respecting this original vision. At the end of the slide, you'll tell me how much we have achieved, to how close we have come to this image. So technical drawing to be produced, and we had to get a guest house with a sitting room and sleeping quarters delineated, but not strictly. There had to be movement all around. It's quite a small space, and then we had to carefully select an area where to put the bathrooms. There were acute angles, you know, sharp corners. So we cleverly played around, you know, the positioning of the hand wash basins and, you know, the bathroom areas, which conveniently fit in those, while the rest of, you know, and you can see that on the right-hand side, part of this house was built in masonry. And the fact that it was built in masonry, you know, allowed for protect with damp proofing and allowing beam lines to run within the interior. The rest of the house was all built in wood. So we reserved a large portion of that for the sitting room and the sleeping quarters. It has a lower level, and there you can see in the middle is the walkway sitting goal, and the one on the right is the lower level of the house, which we reserved for technical rooms, storage spaces, laundry spaces. You know, this is a guest house. You have bed sheets, you have different elements that to be continuously washed, dried. So there's a space for washing, drying, water storage, generator, all technical, electrical distribution board. So, you know, control, maintenance, and it can happen in the lower level, which is pretty much a functional space, while when you go to the upper levels, it's all fully functioning guest house. And of course, communication was done not only, when you look at the earlier pictures, this is very strictly regulated technical drawings, specifying each dimension, material, very well coordinated for purposes of technical efficiency. At the same time, we never left the architectural verb that can only be enjoyed through sketches where we provided description of the different elements of the architecture, the floor type and material, the elements of the wooden cladding, some of the niches where they had to be introduced, the wooden architrave and wooden skirting going all around the building, ceramic tiles where we want them to be positioned. We appreciated and we also capitalized on the uniqueness of the hand sketch, which elaborated and also very well narrated what we wanted to convey as a message to the contract. So we started the journey, and like I said, we stripped down everything, the bare minimum, and the most important structural elements were left in place, where the rest of the cladding and other elements had to be stripped down. The wall had to be peeled away to understand what was behind. So some of them we had to preserve, some of them we had to carefully remove. And if you can see, we took down all the ceiling and now the roof truss is all exposed. Some of it was damaged through weathering and through years of misuse. So we had to start with the correction and re-strengthening, replacing all the damaged members. All the other members which were not damaged and which were suitable to the architectural exercise had to be exposed. So the first part of the exercise was we had to lie the ceiling along the angle of the angle or the slope of the corrugated sheet, so that it gives you much headroom, and careful structural renovation of re-strengthening and replacing of elements happened. The whole project, by the way, was a one-year exercise. We had a project period 9 months, but then we extended it to like 3 more months, for certain elements to be polished. So, as-built measurements, what is the situation on site? We had a pre-drawing based on site measurements, but once you start removing elements, you are in for a surprise. So improvisation was really of the program. We worked hand in hand with the contractors team. It was not a matter of just delivering a drawing and walking away. Unless you work with a contractor, you can never get the job done. So you see the strengthening of the roof truss. We introduced steel brackets. To my architect friends who were a little bit conservative about introduction of modern materials, this is my message: efficiency and and the possibilities that steel provide is phenomenal. We can still also do this with wood, but the cost factor against efficiency, availability, and the degree to which we can manipulate is factors which you have to take into consideration. A very flexible frame of mind, going for different possibilities and different techniques is very much important when you're looking at a project with a very tight budget and a very tight timeline. Interior elements, careful replacement of wooden elements on the wooden wall elements, careful re-strengthening of elements that were worn out, and the replacement and amendment required, step-by-step interventions. You can see on the left-hand side, we started introducing the electrical power, switches and sockets, and all of what you see on the interior, all of this element, we lined up with plaster boards. Plaster boards allow you, to give an even, fuller surface finish on the inside. that the guest house required. And at the same time, it allowed us to conceal, most of the elements like, the electric elements, plumbing, and so on behind it. We used cement boards, 9mm cement boards, fire retardant from 60 to 90 minutes, water repellent all around, water resistant. This thing, you can use it on the exterior, and it can be 4 or 5 years. I've used it on other projects as well. It will not wear down. At the same time, it is also impact resistant. You can use it, but it can withstand impact. So materials were carefully selected, for the interior conversion, while we kept the exterior pretty much intact. We introduced, gypsum walls to work with, this divider between the living space and the bedroom space. And we tried to improvise. We tried to take inspiration from the Harari wall elements, but in a little bit of improvisation as a space delineating medium. So, the ceiling is, at this stage, we had to put the ceiling on the interior space, the left-hand side picture. So, part of the elements that we believed were interesting as part of the renovation, we exposed them, so they become part of the architecture. The ceiling raised a bit, and the fact that we were going to plaster all of it in white color creates a bit of spatial liberty, because if you work with very dim colors in a very tight space like this one, it can feel constricted and suffocating. Some of the elements, the suspended floor is a unique feature of this building. You come on the streets of Jagol, this is what you see. This is the bottom of the guest house before entering into the Arthur Rambo compound. But it's interesting when you look at it from bottom. So we preserved it. We put all the elements in place, applied paint, and made it more, enhanced it, so to speak. So working hand in hand with the contractors team, gypsum up in these pictures, plasterboard all in place. We also simultaneously started working on the wooden cladding, on the bottom part, to give it a bit of character. We wanted to play a little bit with the wood, and it was also part of the contrast. The bottom base is all enveloped in this wooden element, which can be, which signifies, which signifies a bit of warmth, while the upper part is all done in white. We had to carefully balance the application of wood against not to overwhelm the space, but also to contrast it with the white color in the expanse that it can create. So slowly taking shape, the building, wooden elements, carefully exposed, part of the truss, wooden doors. We had to preserve them, we had to polish, we had to varnish it and bring it to its original state. And some of the interior space, side, the switch, the sockets, all white, not to really take away from the aesthetics, were all introduced. So this is the decoration on the exterior space. Part of the damaged wooden wall elements were removed and replaced carefully after treatment and application. And then, we started putting the exterior lights. We don't want to put, common lights like, fluorescent lamps. And we introduced lights carefully on the walls, concealed them behind the roof overhangs and so on. So that can also create the architectural delight. So, at this stage, we finished our wooden floor, all done with TID or the Habashine. And then we introduced elements there for hanging pictures and other memorabilia from Arthur Rambo's history, which you will see in the other pictures still to come. The Musharabiye is a very interesting feature of the Harari house. So we introduced it, we created versions of it to delineate the space between the living area and the sleeping quarters. The wood, properly polished and after application of wax, we walked barefoot on this floor to check if it is properly in place, because you remember the earlier one was a cement finish, so we had to chisel a part of it, remodify it, and completely apply this wooden floor, which was a much better upgrade for the interior. The kitchenette on the right hand side picture, it's a wet area, so underneath, we didn't compromise on technicalities, like I said, fireproofing, waterproofing, and so on. We're pretty much given a lot of attention. So the floor under the kitchenette here is a polished concrete floor. It's waterproofed underneath because this is a wet area, wet space to work on. We started working in the bathrooms, so we used elements of treated wood, this pine or the ted again, but treated and varnished with special chemical to protect it from water. The bowl, all these hand wash basins, we had to look to the market. We extensively looked at different suppliers, different places all around Addis to find, these unique shell elements, because this is not something you go into a shop buy, especially in Ethiopia. It's very difficult. So we improvised as much as possible with what was available. And just like the kitchen space, look at the floor, it's polished concrete again, but the ruggedness and the roughness and the irregularity was welcomed, appreciated, enhanced, become part of the architecture. We did not make it, very clean, polished, neat, so it would have, defeated the purpose of the irregularity of the elements, bring their own vigor to the architecture. And we really worked on this project as a crafts project, like I said, working interior designer with his heart very close to the crafts, and also an artist who was hands-on working on our projects. We ourselves, appreciated the crafts and working with the hand and the ruggedness, the roughness, and all those elements to be introduced in the design, so that as much as possible, we want this to look very, very organized, not organized, rigid, but we wanted to make a bit interactive, a bit irregular, a bit rugged. So the bathrooms there, we improvised most of the building elements. If you look at, the mirror there, it was custom made, designed just for this project. We used a bit of the, the bit of pottery, enhanced pottery, and then the mirror glued to that section, and a bit of the craft, the hand weaving of the basketry also interwoven in that part. So it was a creation, an improvised creation there. The picture frames, Emir Abdullahi, the last Emir of Harar, capturing that, and Arabic calligraphy by a famous Iranian art, Hassan Masoudi, all courtesy of Jacques Dubois. We produced all of this. Look at the color. We wanted to bring a bit of color, a bit of flair to this building. So the white, most of the volume looks white, so that it can stack and welcome all of the crafts, all of the elements within the building's interior. The aflala, or the traditional element that was used by the Hararis, we improvised it into a lampshade. This was a courtesy of Ethiopia, where Jacques Dubois is a director, so they work extensively on handicrafts projects. So improvisation was at the heart of the project. So the same can be said about the tiles that you see on the kitchenette, where we improvised a lot. Most of these elements, like I said earlier, all procured for the project, all produced specially for the project. And this is what the interior looks like. We populated it with all these elements, flair, and so on, to create a unique interior. We improvised and brought on all the elements. The Harari house was with elements, so we improvised a version of the Harari house, but very much all of these elements are used by the guest house. You can see some shades. Everything is custom made here. So it kind of relates with the occupant and not something that you can find like you do in any hotel room. The bedroom spaces also, you know, had their own character, and we introduced, you know, this insect protection system. But you know, we gave it a bit of a touch, you know, not to simply look too functional. And yes, you know, the play of light is magnificent in this space, especially at night. It's quite a delight to be in. Exterior is magnificent, you know, the color and everything, it's so much full. This was all teamwork. Team. I have a lot of slides packed up, so I'm sure you're getting the ambience as we move along. But, you know, we hand in craft, we worked in hand with the contractor. It was not simply a matter of passing the drawing and keeping quiet. It was the Harari Tourism Bureau. You know, the difference between Harare and Addis Ababa is the Harari, they are much concerned about heritage. They come, they visit, they give constructive feedbacks, and they were also very much part of the team. So, you know, everything was hands-on, measurements, rechecking, redoing, and in the right-hand side picture, Pauline Lecointe, she was the Culture Affairs Director, the Embassy of France, and really Paul was also part of the team. The embassy was a phenomenal partner in this project. So, you know, we ended up doing some of the stuff ourselves, you know, connecting the pieces, putting certain elements where we felt it was not right, so we had to correct it ourselves, and it was experience, teamwork, sharing ideas, and all collaborative, all together. So quite a collection of team members from the Embassy of France, the owners, the Agricultural Tourism Bureau, Jacques Dubois and Menfasawit from interior designer, and Muya Ethiopia with Addis Kidan for the crafts arts. Young studio, Kuncho, they are architects. They produced all the booklets and the pamphlets for the project, and uniforms and other things to African mosaic. And Dr. Hajafaj Badri is quite a gentleman. And yeah, it was one of the, an interesting project you can remember for a lifetime. So we started with a challenging journey, and we ended up feeling happy about it. I'm sure our smiles speak from the last picture. So I'm all open for questions now, and that's it about Harar Arthur Rambo House.
Okay, thank you so much, Brooke. That was an amazing presentation. Before we proceed to the question and answer, I'd like to apologize for the inconvenience that happened earlier. We have it taken care of now, and we'll make sure it never happens again. Next to that, we do have a few questions from the audience. Fikra Selassie asked, is there a possibility to have this whole document printed and made available?
Yes, in fact, we plan to do that, and we were working with the embassy also to have the document produced, and I am sure we will produce one document, and yes, we are working on it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And also, as Juliet told you in the chat, we will have this uploaded to our site and our YouTube channel, so you can have access to the slides as well as this video. On to the next question. What was the role of the attitude of the government authorities throughout the whole process?
You know, interestingly, we learned a lot from Harar. As I was mentioning towards the end of my presentation, the attitude in Harar and the attitude in Addis Ababa is quite different. In Addis Ababa, we do not have what do you call a well-pronounced understanding, or we do not care about the built heritage that much. I can speak about the average Addis Ababan here, whether government official, private entity, or the people living in the city of Addis. Our recognition and understanding of heritage is very low. But when you go Harar, by virtue of the Harari become, you know, the Harari is a very small nationality, and the people are quite small in number, but they are so much emotionally connected to their historical roots, to their background. So by virtue of that closeness and that connectedness, as well as the fact that the Jogul is registered as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Harari have a very acute recognition of built heritage. They look up to the structures as their own. There is a sense of belongingness which you cannot find in Addis Ababa. Perhaps Aksum can rival Harar, but not Addis Ababa. So that really helped, the average understanding of the individual, the government, the people in government, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. That really helped us, and we really capitalized on that. Without their understanding, we could not have achieved it. So it's quite different from what you have in Addis Ababa.
Okay. Next question from Blaine. She asked, do you have plans to implement monitoring techniques for the timber structures, especially for moisture content?
Indeed, excuse me, part of the the assessment we did with the contractor was exactly for that, and the selection of the wood species, which in this regard we used a lot of the Wanza wood, can withstand a bit of the moisture fluctuations. And the thing is, when we worked in Harar, we did not want to hire a contractor from Addis Ababa. We worked with a gentleman, an architect, who had done 2 or 3 other restoration projects in Jogul. He knows what it takes to restore a project. So part of the interview we implement on the selection of the tender was to understand the background behind the potential contractor. So that one. And second one, all the knowledge, all the craftsmanship and everything is preserved in Harar. All of the elements are preserved in Harar. Everything is present in Harar. So even if there is damage or a possibility of renovating it in the future or upgrading it in the future, the knowledge is pretty much based in Harar. So we did this very carefully. So that was also looked into. Yeah.
Okay. So another question from Nahum. It's quite a long one, but in short, he asks, as far as I understand, call it either architecture or urbanism, both truly express time and space. And you said there is a feeling of timelessness in Harar. Can you speak more about the feeling of timelessness you have perceived in the antique Harar?
This is a difficult question. I mean, the thing is, to put it in words, that's the most interesting. I'm no composer of music, and I'm not a good poet either. So the thing is, you feel like you are encountering both the old, the new, the future, and the present all in one. You walk in Harar. The people that you meet, the interactions that you have, the building structures, the courtyards, and the organization of the space all come in a certain interesting sequence that you observe step by step in a certain manner. So they kind of astonish you, and they also surprise you through their intrigue, through their interaction, to withstand the test of time and still be there, while at the same time encountering, elements reminding you of your present state is quite interesting. It's the people, it's in the buildings, it's in the courtyards, it's in the spaces, it's in the language that people speak, in the manner in which they approach you. It's completely a combination of all of these elements. So it's really difficult to put it in words. Perhaps, like I said, if I had the caliber of Arthur Rambo, I could say something about Harar, but I leave that to the poets. And what I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you have to walk the streets of Jogul, and then you can understand what I'm talking about.
Well noted. So next question is from Tyron. He asks if you can tell a little bit about the collaboration process with the artists and the craftsmen. Were they engaged early on in the briefing stage? How their designs developed? Any key lessons learned throughout the collaboration process? And have you applied similar approach to other projects?
Very long collection of questions. So let me start at the middle turn. The thing is, let me speak for myself and my role, especially on this project. I was the project manager, assembling their group to come together and work. And I was also involved in the architectural design. So when we started the design, we had a certain approach. While Jacques Dubois as an interior designer, Addis Kidal as an artist walked about in their own perspectives. And down the line, as much as possible, we wanted to enjoy the project. You have to create a design that is structured, quantified, and engineered in such a manner that you can do the tender, select a viable contractor. So I was leading that process of converting all these documents into viability and possibility of contracting them. So after initial design process, interaction, coordination of different elements, I took the journey to completing all the design documents in time. I told you the French embassy, they're very serious people. They want the documents delivered. This is taxpayers' money kind of fund, properly used, time properly used. So I was looking into that aspect. But as an architect, I also recognize that the creative process is always going on. It's dynamic. It's not something you start. It's not a start and end process. It's always developing. And after we submitted the tender and when we were about to start the construction, the design has evolved to such a manner that what we had put on that very structured drawing is going to be changed a lot, because the artistic dimension, the element of color, the element of material, the element of space delineation, the element of the different spaces interacting, when it went through these two magnificent individuals' minds, it had transformed already. Alas, that was a very challenging aspect for me, because everything is quantified, specified. Any change that you make, a contractor is going to ask for more costs, time, and so on. Nobody wants to hear about cost and time. That's the challenge when you start construction. So I stepped back. This is my personal journey, so I might share mine. I stepped back and I started controlling that. Okay, the element, the Musharabi, the square meter of Musharabi element that we used suddenly extended. It was a lot. Now we don't have that many square meters. So, okay, what do I do to mitigate that? Originally in the document, we planned to take out the entire corrugated sheet. Upon inspection on site, I made a determination and I said, the material is good, there is less rust, so let's scrub it off and paint it. I saved a bit of money to play for the extra square meters of Musharabi required by the designers and the artists. So, the wooden floor had extra material that we had to use as cladding. There were extraction systems for the bathrooms, which we eliminated. I had to put that as a contingency. I had a bit of money there, so I had to spread it out along certain. So I was playing like the person who was checking the numbers, who was saying everything is in order, contract was not complaining, time is going on, everybody is happy. But inside there was a lot of turmoil, tension, fighting, selection. So it was a dynamic process. I was the gentleman going around, making sure that none of this, spreads out to the client. Some of the things can be improvised. So the final, document in terms of, quantities and specifications is a little bit different from the original design. But everything is within, in fact, we finished under budget, tightly controlled, but allowing these two individuals to fashion the design and so that it can organically grow. Like I said, they were both craftspeople. They ended up working with the contractors team. Some of the intended design ideas were fashioned, changed. So I was allowing these individuals to do what they best, but I monitor time, quality, cost, and other parameters which get clients alarmed. So I was doing a bit of TR and monitor all around.
Interesting. Another question from Fissum. Thank you for the platform where we can have such projects to be discussed by an active architect. My question is, can I know how many trips you did for the supervision?
In a year, I made about 26 to 28 trips, if I'm not mistaken. So I was visiting like twice a month or like 3 times a month in certain cases. And you know, the rest of the team had their own sequence. So we traveled at different times in different areas, but sometimes together and so on. And, yes, for me, it was quite intense because it required interaction. We had 2 sets of clients. The Harari Ministry of Culture and Tourism required reports, updates, so they required the consultants to be on site. And then we had the French Embassy, which required regular updates of construction progress and monitoring in terms of timeline and cost. So for me, it was a little bit, and I had to allow this orchestra of unique craftspeople and artists to play all. So I made the most trips.
Okay. Another question from Fikra Selassie. How's the follow-up of both projects after the projects were completed, and who's responsible for minor maintenances to be done?
A very good question. For the project in Harar, the fact that we selected a contractor quite familiar with restoration and living in Harar with all his personnel and expertise right there allows the Harari Tourism Bureau to work with, with him for regular maintenance and updating. He knows the history behind the design. He worked on the construction. He knows the availability of materials. He has the craftspeople ready. So part of the objective was met when we selected this gentleman, and they have a recurring, contract we advised. I'm not sure if that was implemented, but it will be, because the fact that they have this gentleman right on the ground allows them to cater for any maintenance in the future. For the project in Addis Ababa, Varnero, excellent wood workshop and excellent craftspeople. So what we did was, after we completed the project, we brought the employers into a maintenance contract with Varnero, and all of that wood element will be maintained twice a year. So there is an ongoing maintenance contract Varnero for all of the woodworks, because wood has to be maintained, has to be preserved, has to be protected. So we put that as part of the contract. So the client into a maintenance contract with Varnero in Addis Ababa.
Another question from Hewitt. What would you suggest for future maintenance projects that will happen in Atleast or other cities regarding legislation or construction techniques?
In terms of legislation, honestly, we really have to do a lot because what is a bit difficult is the image given to heritage, or the recognition of heritage, or how we understand heritage is sadly not to the required level of that also shows in the attention we give to these buildings that were built in the 19th and the 20th centuries. More important than the regulation or the proclamation, I would really stress that we work on outreach and also awareness programs. As a student, as an architect student in my last graduating year, I worked with Fasil Georgis, the famous architect and patron of architectural heritage in Ethiopia. As a student, I worked on documenting built heritage. So we, as a group of students, we went around in Piazza, we went around in Mercato, Zanches, around Bole, and we were looking at these houses. We were identifying them on a map. We were studying their ownership structure, and were encountering their owners through different interviews. Let me tell you a fascinating story, what we collected from that document, from that research. So the interesting thing is, a lot of people, whether it's in government or the private sector, they would rather demolish the buildings and create something new. So there is a very big gap in how we architects or artists or historians look at these projects, and how a vast majority of tenants and government officials and even private sector developers look at this project. We were lucky enough to work with Leah and Kasahun Kabada. Like I said, they are a huge set of individuals who wanted to invest in heritage and the preservation of that architecture. But a vast majority of society in Addis Ababa are sadly not aware or not well tuned to what these buildings represent in Ethiopian society. A month ago, if I'm not mistaken, or 6 weeks or 2 months back, a famous building, a registered heritage, was demolished to make for a police camp. This was a recent incident. It was on Facebook. Some of the architects who are in this panel, in this audience, we started the campaign on social media. It was an outrage. It was really sad. Just overnight, a building which was there for 100+ years was eliminated to make way for a police. Our famous Sheraton Hotel, Sheraton Addis, on the place where it is situated, there used to be a famous registered heritage of a former noble one, which was completely destroyed to make way for this investment. So the perception of these buildings, that of a bygone era, something we plan to forget, or we choose to forget, or we choose not to be part of. The awareness is more important than proclamations or standards or regulations or whatever. Because unless we create that awareness or that recognition, no matter what you do, it's always a fight. Because I had a chance to meet some of the people in the heritage group and so on. It's really sad. Their level of recognition and understanding. It's like a typical government bureaucrat. First, the awareness of what these buildings represent in Ethiopian society has to be made aware before we start working on proclamations and standards. Because if you cannot honor this thing within your heart, if you don't recognize it, no set of rules can prevent you from destroying or manipulating this building. So I'm really happy this society of professionals, Intbau, the fact that your team created this chapter. Honestly, guys, you are doing a phenomenal job. We really need a lot of this kind of awareness, a lot of these sessions. We have to penetrate the very heart of society. I don't want to waste everybody's time, but it has a lot to do with our political psyche, with our psychological makeup, the way the country went on a turmoil after the 1974 revolutions. If Intbau allows me, I will give a lecture on that one in the future. But this is something, really, the recognition behind heritage, it's not their role. It's our biggest challenge. Sometimes you talk to people and they look at you in a funny way. What is he talking about? Oh, this old building. Why do you care about the old? We have to build the new Addis Ababa. It's such a dilemma. And but a lot of these awareness programs like what this panel is offering will really help a lot in the future.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that wraps it up for the day. Thank you, Brook, for this amazing presentation. We really do. I loved it personally, but I think it was amazing. And also, yes, definitely, you guys soon will arrange another lecture with Brook regarding the topic he just talked about. So stay tuned. Also, I'd like to mention that we have Taryn here who will be speaking on the next series on the 6th of May regarding embodied knowledge and crafts, New Rock Hewan Church of Northern Ethiopia. And also, if you would like to be a member of Intibau, I have shared the link in the chat and Juliet will share it again. You can sign up there. Make sure to follow us on our social media as well. And hope to see you all on the next talk. So thank you so much, everyone. Binyam or Juliet, if you have anything to add.
I think you've summed it up perfectly, Nina. Thank you so much, Brook, and have a good rest of your evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.